Marcus walked through the hallway of Jefferson Middle School like he always did on Monday mornings. He was thinking about lunch and whether they'd have pizza or the usual mystery meat. But then he froze. Standing right there by the principal's office was something impossible. A dragon. Not a picture of a dragon. Not a costume. An actual, real, living dragon. It was huge, easily 8 feet tall with shimmering blue scales that caught the light. Its wings folded against its back, and its golden eyes moved around the school like it was taking everything in. The creature was wearing a visitor's badge. This was insane. Marcus pinched himself to make sure he wasn't dreaming. The principal, Mrs. Henderson, noticed Marcus staring and waved him over. "Don't be shy, come say hello. This is Kef. He's joining us as part of the Galactic Education Coalition exchange program." Marcus's brain couldn't process what she was saying. Galactic? Like space? Keth is a draconian from the ZYX system. He'll be staying with the Williams family and attending classes here for the next year, Mrs. Henderson continued, speaking like she was talking about a transfer student from another state, not another planet. Keth extended his scaled hand toward Marcus. His claws were sharp but not threatening. "Hello," Keth said, his voice deep but surprisingly gentle. "I am honored to learn in your institution." There was something formal and careful about how he spoke, like he was translating thoughts into English. Over the next few days, Marcus wasn't the only one shocked. The entire school was buzzing with questions. How did Keth get here? Was his family really letting him go to middle school? What was it like living in space? Keth didn't seem interested in any of that. He was focused on something else entirely. It happened on the first day of class. Mrs. Henderson handed Keth a stack of papers along with the other students. It was thick. Multiple pages of math problems, reading assignments, essay questions about history, science worksheets, and more. The homework assignment alone could take hours. Marcus watched Keth's face as he looked down at the papers. His expression changed. His eyes narrowed. His mouth opened slightly like he wanted to say something but thought better of it. "What's wrong?" Marcus asked quietly. "What is this?" Keth asked, holding up the papers like they might bite him. "Homework," Marcus said, shrugging. "You know, stuff teachers make you do at home." "You do school work at home?" Keth sounded confused. "For what purpose?" Marcus laughed. "I don't know. To learn more, I guess. Teachers think we don't study enough in class." What Marcus didn't know was that in Keth's world, learning wasn't like this at all. Where Keth came from, you didn't sit at desks and solve problems slowly. You didn't read textbooks or write essays. Instead, you connected your mind to a machine. The machine downloaded information directly into your brain. It took maybe 30 seconds. Then you knew things. You understood formulas, history, languages, everything. You didn't have to struggle. You didn't have to think hard. The knowledge was just suddenly there, like you'd always known it. The idea of doing schoolwork at home for hours seemed pointless to Keth. It seemed backwards. But he also wasn't going to admit that he didn't understand something. Pride was important in his culture. He was a draconian, and draconians didn't show weakness. So he took the papers without complaining. That night, Keth sat at the desk in his host family's spare room. The Williams family had been nice enough, giving him space and trying not to ask too many questions. Now Keth stared at the first math problem. It looked simple enough. Find the value of x. He'd seen this before in the downloaded knowledge files. The answer should be easy. He started writing. Then he stopped. Something was wrong with his answer. He erased it. He tried again. Still wrong. He read the problem more carefully this time, trying to understand what it was asking. This took longer. Much longer. He was used to things being instant. This was slow and frustrating. 2 hours passed. Keth's claws were tired from writing and erasing. His eyes felt strained from reading. His mind actually felt tired, which was strange because mental work had never tired him before. But then something happened. He solved the problem. Not because he downloaded the answer, but because he worked through it himself. He actually understood why the answer was correct, not just what the answer was. Keth sat back in his chair and stared at the single solved problem. His scaled forehead was sweating slightly. It was midnight. He still had 4 more pages of homework to go. Most draconians would have given up by now. They would have called the school and complained, demanding that homework be eliminated as cruel treatment. But Keth didn't feel like giving up. Something about the struggle had changed how he felt. It was different from downloading. Better maybe. His mind felt sharper. More alive. He reached for his pencil again and went back to work. 2 weeks had passed since Keth arrived at Jefferson Middle School. Most people thought the dragon would be some kind of celebrity showing off and talking about space all the time. But that wasn't happening. Instead, something stranger was going on. Nobody really understood it yet, but something was changing about Keth. It started in the library on a Wednesday morning before school began. David Chin, who worked as the student library assistant, was shelving books when he heard a voice behind him. "Excuse me. I need more homework." David turned around and nearly dropped a stack of books. It was Keth, standing there looking completely serious, holding his completed assignments in his claws. "More homework?" David couldn't hide his confusion. "Dude, most people try to avoid homework. You're asking for extra?" "Yes," Keth said without hesitation. "I require additional work. Math, science, history, writing. Everything." Tommy, who was working on a project in the corner of the library, came over to investigate. "Did Keth just ask for more homework?" Tommy looked at David, then at Keth. "Are you feeling okay? Did you hit your head or something?" Keth turned those intense golden eyes toward Tommy. "I am functioning properly. But I have discovered something important. This struggle you call homework, it makes my mind work in ways I never experienced before. It is not faster than downloading knowledge. It is slower. But it is better. Much better." Tommy pulled up a chair and sat down. He'd been thinking about this himself actually. He'd noticed that when he studied hard for a test, when he actually had to work through problems and think about why things worked, he remembered the information way longer. It stuck with him. But he'd never really thought about it as something important. "So you're saying that when you struggle to learn something, your brain gets stronger?" Tommy asked. "Yes," Keth nodded. "In my world we do not struggle. Knowledge is given to us instantly. We know facts. We understand information. But we do not think. Not truly. Your method is different. When I must work to understand, when I must try and fail and try again, my mind creates new patterns. I think I am becoming smarter." The librarian, Mrs. Patterson, who had been listening to this conversation, smiled to herself. She'd always believed this was true about learning, but it was interesting hearing it from an alien who had experienced both ways. That conversation changed things. Word got around the school that Keth actually wanted more homework. Students would see him in the library at odd hours working on assignments. Teachers started giving him extra credit projects, harder problems, and more complex assignments. And Keth ate it all up. He wasn't just doing the work either. He was becoming obsessed with it in a way that was kind of inspiring and kind of weird at the same time. One night, Mr. Wallace, the science teacher, came back to his classroom for something he'd forgotten. He found Keth there, sitting at a desk covered with sketches and papers. The drawings were incredible. They showed complex mechanical designs, machines that could solve problems in completely new ways. Mr. Wallace picked up one sketch and studied it carefully. It showed a system for water collection that was unlike anything in their textbooks. The design was elegant and efficient and entirely original. "Keth, where did you get this idea?" Mr. Wallace asked. "From the homework assignment," Keth replied. "You asked us to think about water systems in the desert. I began to think. Then I drew. Then I thought more. The drawing became something new. Something I created, not something I downloaded." Mr. Wallace shook his head in amazement. He'd been teaching for 15 years and he'd never seen a student produce something like this from a basic assignment. He made copies of Keth's designs. He showed them to other teachers. Word started spreading through the school that something incredible was happening with the dragon student. By the third week, Keth had become something of a legend. But the most interesting thing was how he'd integrated with the other students. He wasn't sitting alone anymore. At lunch, you'd find him surrounded by kids talking about everything. One day it was philosophy homework. Keth was sitting with Jessica and another student named David, discussing an assignment about whether people had free will or whether everything was determined. Keth's arguments were sharp and clever. He wasn't reciting facts that had been downloaded into his brain. He was thinking. He was creating new ideas. He was debating and questioning and building arguments from scratch. Jessica leaned back and looked at Keth with something like wonder. "Okay, I have to say this. You're actually getting smarter the more work we give you. Like, you came here already knowing a ton of stuff, but now you're becoming brilliant. It's kind of crazy." Keth looked at her seriously. "Yes, I have realized something important. In my civilization we thought we had achieved the highest form of learning. But we were wrong. You humans do not know the most information. But you think the best. You struggle, and through struggling you become something greater. This is how humans win. This is how you survive against species that are older, stronger, and more advanced. You think better because you fight for every piece of knowledge you gain." The lunch table got quiet. What Keth said made sense in a way that nobody had really thought about before. Teachers didn't usually explain homework like that. They just assigned it? But maybe that was the whole point. By the third month, something unusual was happening at Jefferson Middle School. Keth wasn't just doing well anymore. He was dominating every single class. His test scores were perfect. His assignments were brilliant. But the real thing that stood out was how he thought. He didn't just answer questions. He asked new questions. He made connections that teachers hadn't even considered. It was during a history project that things really got interesting. The assignment was simple enough. Research a historical event and write about it. Keth chose the Industrial Revolution. But instead of just writing down facts about factories and steam engines, he created something completely different. He drew parallels between the Industrial Revolution and technological changes happening in different civilizations across the galaxy. He argued that human progress came from struggle and innovation, not from having advanced technology handed to them. He even suggested that older alien civilizations might have stalled in their development because they'd gotten too comfortable with their knowledge downloads. When Mr. Patterson, the history teacher, read Keth's project, he sat in his office for 20 minutes just thinking. He'd been teaching history for 12 years. He'd never had a student make connections like this. Keth wasn't just understanding history. He was analyzing it. He was creating original thoughts about it. Word started spreading through the school, but it didn't stop there. The other exchange students noticed what was happening too. There was Vera, a Xylothian from a planet where everyone was connected to a collective mind network. There was Seven, a crystalline being made of living diamond who came from a civilization that had perfected mathematics and physics centuries ago. And there was Buzz, an insectoid whose species had colonized 17 different solar systems. All of them had come to Earth thinking human schools would be simple, easy, maybe even entertaining in a boring way. But they were watching Keth change. And it was impossible to ignore. One day at lunch, Vera sat down across from Keth. She'd been observing him for weeks, noticing how he was different from when he arrived. Back then, Keth had seemed frustrated and overwhelmed. Now he seemed alive. He seemed sharper. His eyes had a brightness they didn't have before. "How are you doing this?" Vera asked directly. "You're outperforming students from civilizations millions of years more advanced than humanity. What's your secret?" Keth looked up from his food. He didn't smile exactly, but there was something satisfied in his expression. "Homework," he said simply. "Give me more homework." "That's it?" Seven asked, gliding over to join the conversation. As a crystalline being, Seven communicated through sound waves, but the translation device made it sound almost human. "Homework is the secret to becoming more intelligent?" "Not just homework," Keth explained. "The struggle. The thinking. The effort required to understand something when you cannot simply download it into your mind. Your civilizations have forgotten how to think because you no longer have to struggle." Buzz made a clicking sound that the translator converted to a laugh. "You're saying we're too advanced to be smart?" "I am saying," Keth paused, choosing his words carefully, "that intelligence without struggle becomes stagnant. You know many things, but you do not understand how to think through new problems. You do not know how to innovate when faced with something outside your downloaded knowledge." The conversation spread. Seven mentioned it to the other crystalline exchange students at a different school. Vera told some Xylothians through their collective network. Buzz contacted other insectoids. Within a week, messages were flying through the exchange student network. Students from across the galaxy were asking the same question. What's happening at Jefferson Middle School? The messages eventually made their way up the chain. They reached the Galactic Education Coalition's headquarters, a massive space station orbiting a neutron star. They reached the office of Minister Kextol, who oversaw all educational programs across the known universe. He read the reports with increasing disbelief. A young draconian, attending a human school, achieving impossible academic results, becoming, according to multiple sources, the most innovative student anyone had encountered in decades. The reports didn't make sense. Humans were considered a developing species. Their technology was primitive. Their civilization was young. How could their educational system be producing superior results? Minister Kextol called an emergency meeting. He presented the data to the coalition's leadership. The older members laughed at first. This had to be some kind of error or exaggeration. But the data was clear. Keth's performance metrics were off the charts. And now other exchange students were requesting transfers to human schools. Within 2 weeks, the requests became a flood. Every exchange student in the program wanted placement at a human school. Scientists wanted to study what was happening. Educators wanted to understand the mechanism. Parents of gifted students were demanding their children be enrolled in human education programs immediately. The coalition's leadership held emergency sessions. They brought in researchers. They analyzed the data obsessively. And they all reached the same conclusion. Somehow, a species that everyone considered primitive and backward was operating a superior educational system. A species that had only recently left their home planet was teaching lessons to civilizations that had conquered galaxies. One coalition member, an ancient being named HFY War who had lived for 3,000 years, finally spoke the truth that nobody wanted to hear. "We have made a terrible mistake," HFY War said slowly. "We thought advanced technology meant advanced thinking. We thought downloading knowledge meant understanding. But we were wrong. The humans have discovered something we lost centuries ago. They still know how to learn." The room fell silent. The implications were staggering. The greatest civilizations in the galaxy had been operating under a fundamental misunderstanding about how learning actually worked. And it had taken a young dragon and a human middle school to expose it. The day everything changed started like any other day at Jefferson Middle School. Students were walking through the hallways, complaining about tests and talking about lunch. Teachers were preparing their lessons. Everything was normal. Then the sky lit up. A massive silver shuttle descended slowly toward the school's athletic field. It was sleek and impossibly shiny, covered with symbols and technology that looked like it came from another world. Because it did. The shuttle landed with barely a whisper of sound, and when the doors opened, out stepped figures that made everyone stop and stare. Dr. Vextorn led the delegation. He was tall and angular, with skin that seemed to shimmer between purple and blue. His eyes were cold and analytical. Behind him came a group of other high-ranking coalition officials, all dressed in identical silver uniforms that seemed to shift colors slightly in the light. They looked like they'd come to judge a crime scene, not visit a school. Principal Henderson met them at the entrance, trying to look confident even though she was walking toward beings who represented the most powerful organization in the known galaxy. Dr. Vextorn didn't bother with handshakes or pleasantries. He walked directly into a classroom where students were working on a math assignment. The students didn't know what to do. There was a dragon-like alien in their school already, but this was different. This was official. This was important. Students sat at their desks, writing by hand, erasing mistakes, trying again. They were struggling with problems, asking the teacher for help, working through concepts slowly and carefully. To Dr. Vextorn it looked primitive. He observed for exactly 5 minutes, then turned to Principal Henderson with an expression of barely concealed disdain. "This is your evidence of superiority?" His voice was sharp and cold. Manual labor disguised as education. Students hunched over paper like it is some ancient ritual. Writing by hand. Making mistakes repeatedly. "This is barbaric." Principal Henderson felt anger rising in her chest, but she kept her voice calm. "Dr. Vextorn, what you're seeing is the process of learning. Our students aren't just memorizing information. They're developing critical thinking skills. They're learning how to solve problems they've never encountered before." "Inefficient," Dr. Vextorn said flatly. "In the coalition, knowledge transfer takes seconds. Your method takes months. Your system is primitive." But Principal Henderson wasn't going to back down. She'd seen what happened with Keth. She'd watched the other exchange students change. She'd read the reports about how Keth was outperforming students from civilizations millions of years more advanced. She knew something important was happening here. "I propose a competition," she said, meeting Dr. Vextorn's cold gaze directly. "If your system is truly superior, prove it. Let your best students compete against ours." The room got quiet. Dr. Vextorn's expression didn't change, but she could see something shift in his eyes. He wasn't used to being challenged, especially not by a human. "A competition," he repeated like he was testing the word. "Fine. You will lose, but we will humor this." Word spread quickly through the school. Keth and the other exchange students who had been transformed by human education were going to compete against the best students from the traditional download system. The challenge wasn't going to be a simple test. Anyone could memorize facts. The challenge was going to be real-world problem-solving. Innovation. Adaptation. Things that required actual thinking, not just knowledge recall. Keth reacted to the news like he'd been waiting for this moment. He immediately started preparing, but not in the way the coalition officials expected. He didn't ask for more information to download. He asked to work on practice problems. He asked to brainstorm with other students. He asked to look at real situations and figure out solutions from scratch. The other exchange students noticed what was happening. 7 The crystalline being started asking to work on group projects. Vera the Xylothian wanted to solve problems collaboratively instead of individually. Buzz the insectoid actually asked for more homework, something that would have been unthinkable a few months earlier. Meanwhile, the coalition brought in their champion students. Young geniuses from advanced civilizations. Beings who had downloaded centuries of scientific knowledge. Creatures whose species had solved problems that humans couldn't even imagine. They arrived at a neutral space station where the competition would take place, looking confident and superior. Dr. Vextorn stood before the assembled students and explained the first challenge. You will have 12 hours to design a water purification system using only the materials provided. The system must be efficient, sustainable, and capable of functioning in harsh environmental conditions. Begin. The human-educated exchange students and the traditionally educated coalition champions looked at the materials. There wasn't much. Some basic equipment. Some containers. Some chemical compounds. Nothing fancy. The traditionally educated students immediately accessed their downloaded knowledge databases. They began reciting solutions from established protocols. They knew exactly how water purification worked because they downloaded that information into their minds years ago. They started building a system based on the most advanced techniques their civilizations had developed. Keth and the other exchange students did something different. They looked at the problem like they'd never seen it before. Which technically they hadn't in this specific context. They asked questions. Why did they need to purify water this way? What if they tried something different? What happened if they combined these materials in an unconventional way? They experimented. They failed. They tried again. After 12 hours, the two teams presented their solutions. The coalition students had built a technically correct water purification system. It was efficient and would work perfectly. But the human-educated exchange students had created something nobody had ever seen before. Their system was more efficient, required fewer resources, and was easier to maintain. It was innovative. Dr. Vextorn's expression remained cold, but something had shifted in the room. The competition had only just begun, and already the results were unexpected. The competition took place on a neutral space station called Nexus Prime, a massive structure floating in the darkness of space. It was designed to be fair ground for all species, with different sections accommodating the environmental needs of various life forms. The station was packed with observers. Coalition officials, scientists, educators, and curious beings from across the galaxy had come to watch what everyone was calling the most important educational competition in history. The first challenge had already proven something important. The water purification system that Keth's team created was genuinely better than what the traditionally educated students built. But the coalition officials weren't ready to admit that yet. They insisted that the first challenge was just luck. One successful design didn't mean anything. There would be more tests. More opportunities for the superior system to prove itself. The second challenge was different. Teams were given a broken piece of alien technology from an unknown civilization. They had to figure out what it did, why it wasn't working, and how to fix it. The traditionally educated students immediately tried to identify the technology by searching their downloaded knowledge. They looked for matches in their databases. When they couldn't find an exact match, they were stuck. They'd been taught specific solutions to specific problems. This problem didn't match anything in their education. But Keth's team approached it like a puzzle. They examined the broken device carefully. They asked questions about its structure. Why was it built this way? What materials were used and why? They theorized about function. They tested their theories. Some ideas worked. Many didn't. But through trial and error, through thinking and struggling, they figured out what the device was supposed to do. Then they fixed it. The coalition officials watched silently as Keth's team not only repaired the device but improved it. They made it more efficient than it had been originally. One of the older officials leaned toward Dr. Vextorn and whispered something. Dr. Vextorn's jaw tightened slightly, but he said nothing. Challenge after challenge, the pattern became undeniable. When problems required creativity and innovation, the human-educated students won. When challenges involved adapting to new situations, thinking in unconventional ways, or solving problems that had no textbook answer, Keth and his team dominated. The traditionally educated students kept trying to access solutions from their downloaded knowledge, and when those solutions didn't exist or didn't work for this specific situation, they faltered. By the time they reached the final challenge, the competition had become embarrassing for the coalition. Their champion students had won exactly 0 challenges. The human-educated exchange students had won every single one. The final challenge was the most complex. Teams had to solve a theoretical problem that nobody in the galaxy had encountered before. They had to propose a solution to a fictional crisis that would require thinking beyond established knowledge. The scenario was this. A civilization had discovered a way to communicate with beings from another dimension, But the communication was starting to destabilize the barrier between worlds. How would you solve it? What would you try? How would you prevent catastrophe? The traditionally educated students immediately began searching their databases for similar problems. There were none. They had no downloaded solutions because this problem had never been solved before. They sat in silence, unable to proceed. Keth's team started asking questions immediately. What do we know about dimensional barriers? How does communication work between different realities? What if we tried to reinforce the barrier instead of shutting down communication? What if the solution involved understanding the beings from the other dimension instead of just trying to block them out? They debated. They disagreed with each other. They refined their ideas. And they came up with a proposal that was creative, thoughtful, and innovative. When it came time for the final presentations, everyone knew what was about to happen. The traditionally educated students presented their lack of a solution. The human-educated students presented a comprehensive, creative proposal that took everyone's breath away. Then Keth stepped forward to address the entire coalition assembly. He stood there, a young dragon who had arrived at a human middle school just a few months earlier, looking out at beings who had ruled the galaxy for millions of years. His voice was calm but powerful. Every word seemed to carry weight. "You taught us that knowledge is power," Keth began. "You told us that the more information you possess, the more intelligent you become. But you were wrong. You were deeply, fundamentally wrong. Knowledge without understanding is just data. Information without the ability to think about it is useless." He paused, letting his words sink in. Understanding is power. Struggle is power. When you fight for knowledge, when you work for it, when you fail and try again and finally succeed, that knowledge becomes part of you. It shapes how you think. It changes who you are. But when you download knowledge, when information is simply placed into your mind instantly, it remains separate from you. It is not truly yours. Keth's golden eyes scanned the assembly. Humanity taught me something that your advanced civilizations had forgotten. The journey matters more than the destination. The struggle matters more than the achievement. Your systems gave you knowledge, but they took away your ability to think. Humanity's system gave these students something far more valuable. It gave them the ability to solve problems that have never been solved before. It gave them the ability to create. It gave them the power to imagine what does not yet exist and bring it into being. For a moment, the entire space station was silent. No one moved. No one spoke. Then something started. One coalition official began to applaud. Then another. Then another. Within seconds, beings from dozens of different species, from civilizations that had been advanced for millions of years, were standing and applauding a young dragon and a group of human middle school students. Dr. Vextorn's face was unreadable, but he slowly stood. The other officials followed. The applause grew louder. That night, the Galactic Education Coalition made an announcement that would change everything. They announced a historic decision. Every civilization in the coalition would begin establishing new educational programs based on the human model. Homework, projects, real problem solving, struggle and growth. The ancient download system would be phased out gradually, replaced with methods that actually taught people how to think. Scientists began studying human education methods. Educators from across the galaxy came to Earth to observe human schools. Teachers from Jefferson Middle School received invitations to teach on stations and planets they'd never imagined. Mrs. Henderson became an advisor to the Coalition on Educational Reform. And Keth? He stayed at Jefferson Middle School for the rest of the year. He continued doing homework. He continued struggling with problems. He continued growing. When he returned to his home world, he carried with him something more valuable than any downloaded knowledge. He carried the understanding that true power came from thinking for yourself, from fighting for understanding, from never accepting that something was impossible just because no one had done it before. On the day Keth left Earth, hundreds of people came to say goodbye. Teachers, students, families. Even Dr. Vextorn attended, standing quietly in the background, watching the young dragon say farewell to the humans who had changed his entire perspective on what intelligence really meant. As Keth's shuttle lifted off from Jefferson Middle School's athletic field, he looked down at the school one last time. He thought about that first night, sitting at a desk, struggling with a single math problem. He thought about how frustrated he'd been, how foreign the entire concept had seemed. Now he understood. That struggle had saved him. That homework had given him something that millions of years of advancement never could. Sometimes, the simplest methods are the most powerful. Sometimes, the oldest ways are actually the best ways. Sometimes, a human middle school on a small planet called Earth could teach lessons to the most advanced civilizations in the galaxy. And it all started with homework. The end.